There was one vendor that we had selected for audit as a result of data analysis techniques. There were several regions that did the same basic work, but one region was buying this particular piece of equipment far more frequently than the other regions were, and it stood out. We look at that region and see the vendors they're using, and they're using one vendor. Okay, we have some suspicions now. We talked to management, and management says they shouldn't be using that many. They were concerned. They didn't realize that many units were being purchased from this vendor. So we go out and do a surprise audit again. This is another situation where we just show up on their door. But the night before, I will always drive around homes, business locations, kind of get to know the area, and I found a very important tip just driving around. There were a lot of street rods at this gentleman's location, his business location. There were all sorts of people with street rods. They were working on them, and it was very obvious that this man had a very expensive hobby. Street rods, okay, fraud triangle, leg number one, and I haven't even walked in the door yet. And so that particular situation ended up using the cost of goods sold formulation for the real basic proof. The vendor had so many units at the beginning of the year, purchased so many units, sold so many units, and had an ending inventory of so many. Well, we could confirm the purchases, the beginning and the ending inventory, count sheets, and the purchase documentation, but the amount of sales were way off. We were buying more units than they had to sell. How does that happen? And you just don't know. You look at unit one, there were similar units two and units three that were different sizes, different configurations, the same situation. And in addition to selling to us, this vendor sold to others, these same three products. So how does all that work, you know? And just the old cost of goods sold calculation. We're not looking at dollars, we're looking at units. And it worked very beautifully to prove the case. The gentleman never really wanted to confess, actually got him to write a story about it, similar to what I said earlier. The story wasn't that complete, but the documentation, it was very clear what was going on. Another vendor audit that started out with data analysis came from a dirt earth-moving type vendor that had a lot of machinery, heavy earth-moving machinery, and labor that was charged to do the various chores he had been tasked with. And his costs were significantly higher than other costs of other vendors in that same area, doing the same approximate amount of work. And it really stood out, this vendor from the other vendors, so we decided to pay him a visit. This was not a situation where we dropped in unexpectedly. We said, no, we're just going to walk in the front door and talk to them and send them a letter up front. They had agreed to it. We had time. They knew we were coming. Worked well. Got in there within probably an hour and a half, we saw the scheme. They were paying their workers for 8 hours a day and billing us 10. They were billing us for 8 hours on the equipment plus the 2 hours that the guys worked. So equipment and men were being overbilled 2 hours a day at those rates, mounted up kind of quickly. You look at their billings, you look at their payroll sheets, you look at the equipment they had. They did have all of the equipment they were billing us for. So it was existing equipment, but the hours were off. The vendor said, you know, who are you going to report your findings to if you have anything on this one? And I said, well, the region manager. We'll go down and meet with him at the end of the week and tell him what's happened. Really? You know, I've never met that man. Is it possible you could get us an introduction? Sure, I think we can arrange that. So we called the region manager and I explained to him the situation. And this vendor has never met you. He would like to come to your office and meet you and sit in on my explanation to you of what we found. Obviously, I'm going to tell you what I've just told you, but we'll get his reaction there in front of you and you can see it. So we all four of us, the region manager, the staff, and myself, and the one vendor, go into the region manager's office and start talking about the audit. And I said, you know, there's really only one thing we found, and that was they're paying their people for 8 hours, and they're billing us for 10 hours a day. And then I turned immediately over to the vendor and said, can you explain that? Obviously, there was no explanation, and he was told before the meeting was up that his services were being terminated very promptly. But it was kind of a fun situation. Fraud is fun from an investigatory standpoint. It's hard work, but it can have its exhilarating moments as well.